Trinidad Chambliss is playing like going from D2 to winning the Heisman Trophy. That's on the table for this top 5 Ole Miss team.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I am your host, Stephen Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. On today's show, we dive into the Week 6 SEC lines, sharing our early leans and locks for this weekend's matchup. We'll also kind of break down Ole Miss cracking into the top 5 with their dominant win over the LSU Tigers and what that means for the rest of the season. But first, we start with Trinidad Chambliss and what he brings to this offense. And is the Heisman discussion that's kind of starting to bubble, does that make sense right now? We'll talk about that. We'll mention some of the big performers this weekend and what we learned from that game. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available in all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download that app today. So, Trinidad Chambliss had an amazing day for Ole Miss on Saturday as Ole Miss upset. The Ole Miss was favored in the game, but they beat and covered against the LSU Tigers, who were number 4 in the country. And Trinidad Chambliss all week probably heard that this is the most elite defense in the country, and there's no way you can be successful. A DT quarterback can't stand up against the defense where this much money was paid for the transfers. LSU's doing what Ole Miss did a year ago. How can you match that talent when you played at D2 Ferris State? All the Ole Miss fans heard that over the course of the week. That was one of the main talking points from the LSU talking heads. But the reality is, this money that was spent on the defense could not keep up with Trinidad Chambliss. It was big throw after big throw. His 3rd and 14 pass over the middle was in a tiny NFL-level window. He was able to pull that off. It was big on multiple levels. Seemingly every single game, he does something that is like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty amazing. So when you look at Trinidad Chambliss, and we're about to have the conversation about the Heisman Trophy because you're already starting to hear his name bubble up a little bit when it comes to the Heisman Trophy. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there isn't just a clear winner out there right now. There's not even a favorite. There's not a Travis Hunter or a Shedeur Sanders that's taking the narrative about who could win the Heisman Trophy. The name Trinidad Chambliss is starting to build up the list. And with the win over Arkansas, that was pretty cool. The D2 quarterback from Ferris State, he was able to pull that off. And then whenever he beat Tulane, it's like, wow, that was awesome. Did you see that pass he threw on the sideline? That was amazing for a D2 quarterback. But it stopped being cute and started being real when he did that the way he did against LSU. Against LSU, he was 23 of 39, 314 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. The interception was actually volleyballed up by the Ole Miss receiver as well. So it's not entirely on Trinidad. Trinidad was trying to make a play, but he put the ball where normally Deuce Alexander makes that catch. And honestly, against LSU in the second quarter, when Ole Miss was seemingly picking on LSU's cornerbacks, he was making that catch. And Trinidad Chambliss made throw after throw. He's probably one of the most confident quarterbacks that I have seen at Ole Miss in a while. He literally thinks he can do anything on a football field. And after you do that against the LSU Tigers and the best defense that money can buy, I know that used to be a derogatory saying, but now it just kind of is what it is. When you look at the best defense that money can buy, and he did that, put up nearly 400 yards of total offense against that defense, 71 yards rushing, 314 yards passing. Trinidad Chambliss is well on his way to being a major Heisman favorite. Now, we're going to hear a bunch of stuff over the course of the next 2 weeks. And the reason we're going to hear that is because they want a little bit of uncertainty with the Georgia Bulldogs. Because with the amount of time they have, Georgia has Kentucky this week, then next week they play again, and then they have Ole Miss. If you can make it to where you're not quite certain who is going to be the starting quarterback, that'll give you a little bit of an advantage. So Lane is going to try and play that, even though when you look at these last 3 games, it's pretty obvious that Trinidad is the guy for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. And him potentially being on the stage in New York in December at the Heisman ceremony, Lane Kiffin in the audience, this D2 quarterback that was 3rd in the D2 Heisman Trophy last year, by the way, if he can continue to stack these games upon themselves and has those moments to where you win games that you're not supposed to do. Maybe it's on the road in Athens. Maybe it's on the road in Norman. Maybe it is in the Egg Bowl playing at 11 o'clock in the morning the day after Thanksgiving. If he has his Heisman moment with the story that he already has, and Ole Miss continues to win games, because make no mistake, right now, Ole Miss is a favorite to make the college football playoff. If you want to look at my list, this was my list that I picked in July. Got called a homer for this, by the way, and Sunshine Pumper. And I was like, hey, we've won 10 games, 3 out of the last 4 years. No pump is required. It's sunny outside. But Georgia State, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane, and LSU, all W's. W against Washington State. Ole Miss should be favored by about 30 points in that game. They went on the road and got blasted by North Texas 59-10 a little bit earlier in the season. Good coach. He's the guy that was at South Dakota State. Somebody worth paying attention to, but he's not quite there yet. Then it's at Georgia and at Oklahoma before playing 3 out of the last 4 games at home. The goal is 10-2. The goal will always be 10-2. And if you can hit 10-2, Trinidad Chambliss is going to be in the discussion for the Heisman Trophy. Trinidad Chambliss is going to make this offense more and more effective, because the dirty little secret that you have seen over the last 3 weeks is this Ole Miss offense has gotten better and better the more that Trinidad plays. Whether it's running the football, throwing the football, knowing exactly where to put the football, hitting checkdowns. You know, Ole Miss hit 9 different wide receivers against LSU. That's a different thing. I talk about it all the time. I'm a huge fan of Jackson Dart. Massive fan of Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart would have games that he threw and completed passes to Trey Harris, who had 14 catches or something like that. And the other 3 receivers had 1 or 2. That isn't this. Nobody catches more than 4 passes in a game. 9 different people catch the ball. When Ole Miss varies the offense, when Trinidad Chambliss can play point guard, when all of these elite weapons that Lane Kiffin has assembled gets turned loose, you can't double team. You don't know who to double team, which is going to make even the most elite defense vulnerable. And that is the reason Trinidad Chambliss is having success. That is the reason that he has a shot to win the Heisman Trophy. That is the reason that Ole Miss has a chance to make the college football playoff. And that is the reason that it could even go beyond that. This Ole Miss team right now, we heard Dari Noka on SEC Finals say, and he meant it, and he's probably right about it. He asked, is this Lane Kiffin's best Ole Miss team? And everybody's going to say, well, no, it can't be the best Ole Miss team, because last year they put all those guys in the league. No, that was the most talented Ole Miss team. I think this is the best Ole Miss team. They do well in one-score games. They don't get phased very easy. They are very good run blocking. They have a running back. They have an identity. Trinidad Chambliss makes them hard to defend. You put all of that together with a defense that played its best game of the season against the LSU Tigers, giving up only 57 yards rushing over the course of the game, and honestly made Garrett Nussmeier look very, very average. You mix those two together, there's no limit to where they could go. Now, they're going to probably lose a game or two. Yeah, they are. They're not going 12-0 into the playoffs, but they do have the juice enough to get to the college football playoff, and Trinidad Chambliss has the juice enough to win the Heisman Trophy. I mean, there's more to come on this stuff, so stick around for that. Listen, the polls are telling this story loud and clear. You know how I feel about polls. They're not just a ranking, though. They're a reflection of the national conversation around college football. Ole Miss has been on a roller coaster ever since last season, often overlooked despite constant success. But after obliterating LSU, that conversation's over. The Rebels are officially in the mix with the sports elite, and the talk isn't about if they're good, it's about whether they're a top 5 team. We'll dive into what this means and how Ole Miss compares to other heavyweights and why the perceptions finally matches the performance, coming up next. You know, caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-Hour Energy Shots are delivering tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients, all with zero sugar, so there's no crashes. What I love most is how portable it is. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it absolutely anywhere and get that boost whenever you need it. Honestly, I love how fast it kicks in and that it is sugar-free. I don't have to worry about crashing out a little bit later. Enough with the boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-Hour Energy Shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in-store and online at 5hourenergy.com. That is the number 5hourenergy.com or at Amazon today. Do us a favor and like and subscribe and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whatever audio podcast you're going to listen to and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps all of this free. If you want more, join the Insiders program in the subtext link down below. No trolls, 14-day free trial, and the easiest way ever to cancel. So give that a try. And don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Nearly every team, college or pro, is ready for you. Are you prepared to have that conversation with your kid about a top 5 Ole Miss football team? Yeah, it happened. It really happened. If you look at the AP poll, or as I call it, the non-ball knowers poll, but they did rank Ole Miss in the top 5, and the coaches poll, which is the assistant AD's poll, Ole Miss made a big jump after they took apart the LSU Tigers over the weekend. They're number 4 in the AP poll, number 4 in the coaches poll. Ole Miss is at the top of the SEC as far as rankings go, and everybody is kind of hoping that Ole Miss becomes the story moving forward. You can see it with the Trinidad Chambliss, with the Lane Kiffin and the documentary and all of that stuff. They want Ole Miss to make it to the next level. They want that to root for. It is crazy to think about the villain arc that Lane Kiffin had for years, and now he is a sympathetic figure. Listen, Florida, Arkansas, Virginia Tech, anybody that has a job opening is going to put Lane Kiffin on the list because he's SEO catnip. If you put his name there, it's going to do twice as good as it would have done previously. So don't get freaked out if you hear Lane Kiffin's name being bandied about by fans. If they're just trying to be loud, they're just trying to will something to happen. But the reality of this is that, yes, the fans might want it, but the athletic director and the president and the boosters have to want it. And most importantly at all, Lane Kiffin has to want it. And there's not many places across this country that can even afford Lane Kiffin at this point, and even less that gives him the freedom. The point is, don't worry about it and worry about this top 5 ranking. This is unbelievable. And it's the result of several people that played very well for the Ole Miss Rebels in their game. We start with Cam Franklin and Will Eccles, they're kind of going, they're doing their development arc right now. They're in the middle of it. They started out this year, they were a little bit slow as far as defensive line. It was moving, everything was moving fast. Cam Franklin and Will Eccles, they struggled a little bit in early games against Georgia State and early games against Kentucky. Everybody talked about the run defense. And, we talked about in the preseason camp that this Ole Miss team will go as far as the front 7 will take them. There was a little bit of a learning curve whenever they started. Cam Franklin, he hasn't gotten home yet, but he is close. And Will Eccles had a Walter Nolan type play against Garrett Nussmeier on Saturday to where he had a sack, the lone sack of the game. These two players basically alternated over the course of the recruiting season, the number 1 player in the state of Mississippi. So whatever service you look at, Ole Miss got the number 1 player in the state of Mississippi. Cam Franklin on the defensive line makes it to where you have to double team. You have to double team him or he will eat you alive. He is a game wrecker. William Eccles, game wrecker. Xavion Harris, we already know how good he is. And we talk about the defensive line needing double teams to keep players off the linebackers, and that is starting to happen. And less explosives are ready to happen as well. But Cam Franklin's game was a very big game. Another one is Kewan Lacey, the running back, had 23 carries, 87 yards. Remember, this is a talented defense that we were going against. He did have a touchdown in the game. That was pretty cool to see, but him averaging about 4 yards per carry on that defense, that is pretty good. And finally, we got to talk about Daquan Wright. Listen, Lane Kiffin found something against LSU that was schematically was set up to where they could gain 3 or 4 yards. Whenever they needed to do it, they could go to it, and Ole Miss did a good job of disguising it through personnel groupings and disguising it through how they line up and through formations. But the reality is, if you ran an outplay, it couldn't be covered. They were nowhere near the ball where it was supposed to be. And the reality in this LSU defense right now, in my opinion, is their strength lies between the hash marks. The defensive line, the safeties are really good. The linebackers are excellent when you consider Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins. But outside, when you have P.J. Woodland and DJ Pickett, those two young guys playing corner, they could be picked on a little bit. And Ole Miss did pick on them. Ole Miss did a lot of work and some of their best work outside of the hash mark to set up and soften the inside of the hash mark. And Daquan Wright was a huge part of that for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. It should be interesting to see exactly what happens, but I am impressed about the way that Ole Miss was able to systematically take apart LSU. Every phase. I mean, it was a solid performance in every phase, but it wasn't a good performance. If it was a good performance to where Ole Miss played like they did against Arkansas or Ole Miss played like it did against Tulane, it might have looked exactly the same because LSU was not good offensively and Ole Miss's defense is kind of starting to figure it out a little bit. It's going to be imperative that against Washington State, they take that to the next step. They're starting to make explosive plays and affect the quarterback. They need to take that to the next level, and I think they will. Against Washington State, Wazoo's coming into town the week after next. We have a bye week coming up this week, which honestly I need if we're going to be real about it. But next week we'll start talking about Washington State, and then we'll start talking about the game in Athens, Georgia against the Georgia Bulldogs. So we'll see exactly what that looks like for Ole Miss coming up. In our final segment, we're going to dive into the leans and locks across the SEC for Week 6. We break down the latest FanDuel lines that you need to know right after this. One of the tools that help make a huge difference for business owners is Quo. That's formerly Open Phone, by the way. It's the same great business phone system you've heard me talk about before, just with a new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that helps keep you connected 24/7. Quo is the number one business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying two phones or relying on a landline. I love how Quo, formerly known as Open Phone, lets your team share one number and collaborate across calls and texts, kind of like a shared inbox, so no customer gets left hanging. See why 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly Open Phone. Get started free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedoncollege. That is quo.com/lockedoncollege. And if you've got existing numbers with another service, that's okay. Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. And the NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many different ways to play. I've built parlays, tried player props, even followed the game live lines during the games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you have a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day atmosphere experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, let's talk leans and locks with the Week 6 line presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. And this is a light week in the SEC. There's only 5 SEC games going on now that we're in the conference play. There's more teams obviously taking part. Ole Miss and LSU obviously have a bye week, and when you look at it, game day is going to Tuscaloosa, Alabama for Alabama and freaking Vanderbilt, which is awesome. I'm excited about that game, especially after Ryan Williams said that Vanderbilt is going to be basically the bug and they're going to be the sledgehammer. So I am curious to see what that looks like and what Clark Lee can put together to deal with the Alabama offense. All I know is Alabama has trouble stopping the run, and Vandy's pretty good at scheming up the run. So we'll talk about that. All right, so let's look at the games this weekend. We have Kentucky at Georgia. It's at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Georgia's favored with 21.5 points. Kentucky looked pretty sad, honestly. They did not look good against the South Carolina Gamecocks. They started out pretty well. They got up 7-0, and then they got up 10-7, and then there was basically a strip sack that the South Carolina defender recovered, and they ran it back for a touchdown, and at that point it was over. It was all she wrote. But Georgia's favored by 21.5 points. Georgia, their kryptonite this year seems to be throwing teams that throw the football. Tennessee was able to hit them on deep ball after deep ball. Alabama opened them up at home as well. Georgia won that game against Tennessee. They could have 2 losses if Tennessee had a field goal kicker. But Georgia lost the game against Alabama. It should be interesting, kind of a revenge game, but we'll see if Kentucky gives Georgia the problem that they seemingly always do. If you remember last year at this time, this weekend was Ole Miss and Kentucky, but last weekend would have been Kentucky and Georgia won the game 13-12 in Lexington. So we'll see exactly how it goes. We have Texas favored by 7.5 points on the road at Florida. We're on, I guess, Billy Napier fired watch at this point. The game is going to be on likely ESPN. It says ABC or ESPN, but it's likely going to be ESPN, and I'll talk about why in just a second. It's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. We'll see exactly how that goes for the Florida Gators. They have the talent to beat the Texas Longhorn. They do. They have the talent to completely put Arch Manning in hell. They have all of that ability to make that happen, but they have struggled this season. They played an elite defense. Remember, we just did against the LSU Tigers. DJ Lagway threw 5 interceptions in that game. This is another elite defense. The only difference is this game is in the swamp, and if that place has a reason to get behind the Gators, look out. But if Texas scores first, they can keep them at arm's length, so we'll see what's happening there. The game that I think is going to be on ABC, it's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. It is Vanderbilt at Alabama. Bama is favored by 13.5 points. And after they took down the Georgia Bulldogs with a pretty steady amount of ease, that is interesting. But Vandy beat Alabama a year ago, and you deal with the factor of teams that play Georgia the next week. There's usually a little bit of a drop-off, a little bit of a sloppiness. Vandy having a number next to their name is a big deal because Kalen DeBoer, as head coach of Alabama, has struggled with unranked teams, so maybe that will help a little bit. But Alabama is favored by 13.5 points. Kent State is at Oklahoma, being quarterbacked by Michael Hawkins, the backup quarterback. Oklahoma's favored by 45.5 points. Kent State's hot garbage. Don't get me wrong. That's terrible. But that might be too many points. We'll see. I've seen Oklahoma run it up like the national debt calculator with the way they score points from time to time. But 45.5, that's a lot of points. That is a whole bunch of points. And finally, the Mississippi State at the Texas A&M Aggies. Texas A&M is favored by 12.5 points. It's at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on the SEC network. Mississippi State almost. They had Tennessee, had them licked, honestly. A couple of defensive scores that they allowed is the reason that Tennessee won that game. That was a pretty big win by the Volunteers, but Mississippi State probably should have won that game. And looking at the film study this morning or this afternoon or whenever they're practicing, that probably was not a very good feeling, if we're going to be honest. But they're playing Texas A&M. And if you look at the history of Texas A&M, they have struggled mightily with the Mississippi schools, either Ole Miss or Mississippi State. So there could be a weirdness associated, and Jeff Lebby is good with coming up with game plans from time to time. We've all seen this as Ole Miss fans, that they can dial stuff up from time to time, especially after Texas A&M. They beat Notre Dame and they've beaten Auburn, although Auburn, we're pretty close to getting on Hugh Freeze fired watch if they drop game after game. So we'll see exactly how that looks. But Mississippi State, I like the Bulldogs, and I think this Egg Bowl coming up at the end of the year between State and Ole Miss is going to be a little bit of a war. I think there's 3 major games. If you look at Ole Miss's schedule, the 3 toughest games is at Georgia, number 1, at Norman, number 2, and in Starkville, number 3. The 3 remaining road games in Ole Miss's schedule. I know, big surprise that road games are going to be difficult. But with Trinidad Chambliss and the way they're playing, I think they can pull that out. Should be a lot of fun, and we'll see exactly how it goes. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. If you don't believe me, Google Ole Miss podcast and see how much we come up. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's absolutely free. Your support means the world to us. And another big moment on Locked On, college football fans. Locked On and Fire TV are presenting College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12. He's leading the conversation alongside 2-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson and former college star Jesse Holley and Locked On's local panel of experts, which I have been on at certain points this season. It is a college football preview that only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. Also put it on my YouTube page on late Friday, so you can catch it there as well. So hotty toddy, everybody. Remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.